You never imagine you'll find yourself in a situation like this. Sure, you've heard the stories. Tales about guys discovering their wives are sneaking around with the neighbor or someone from work. But those are just stories, things that happen to other people, not to you. Or so I thought. Until it did. It didn't start with anything big. These things rarely do. Suddenly, I was hearing about Ethan a lot more often. Isabella would casually mention, "Ethan fixed the lawnmower today." Or, asterisk, "Ethan trimmed the hedges while you were at work." Asterisk, just little things. I shrugged it off at first, figuring he was just being a helpful neighbor, the kind of guy who steps up because it's the decent thing to do. After all, Ethan had lost his wife a few years back, and we'd always been friendly enough. But then it became a pattern, and the way Isabella said his name, too casual, too comfortable, made me pause. That's when I started to feel like something wasn't right. One evening, I was sitting at the dinner table with Mason, our 8-year-old. Isabella was in the kitchen, humming while she cooked. Out of the blue, Mason piped up with, asterisk, "Uncle Ethan and Mom have fun when you're not here." Asterisk, it was like someone had sucker punched me. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral for Mason's sake. Asterisk, "What kind of fun, buddy?" Asterisk, I asked, forcing my voice to sound casual, like it was no big deal. Mason shrugged, stuffing spaghetti into his mouth. Asterisk, "Games and stuff. They laugh a lot." Asterisk, I tried to brush it off. Kids say strange things sometimes, right? But there was something about how matter-of-factly Mason said it, like it was the most normal thing in the world. And that's when the knot in my stomach started tightening. When suspicion creeps in, it's wild how quickly your mind starts connecting so you didn't even realize we're there. Suddenly, every little detail seemed loaded with meaning. I noticed Isabella dressing differently. She started wearing more makeup around the house and clothes that were, let's just say, more revealing than usual. She used to save those outfits for date nights, but now she'd put them on for no particular reason, even when I was at work. And Ethan? His visits stopped feeling casual. One Saturday, I took the day off to spend time with the family, and who shows up unannounced? Ethan. He looked startled, like he hadn't expected me to be there. "Hey, Noah," he said, rubbing the back of his neck like a guilty teenager. Asterisk, "Didn't know you'd be home." Asterisk, "Yeah, I bet you didn't." I thought, my eyes darting to Isabella. Her cheeks flushed, and she waved it off with that fake smile she uses when she's trying to cover something up. I should have confronted her right then and there, asked her why Ethan always seemed to show up when I wasn't around. But I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was overreacting. Maybe I didn't want to face what was becoming increasingly obvious. Still, it wasn't just Ethan showing up that bothered me. It was how Isabella acted around me. She started keeping her phone face down on the table, a habit she never had before. If I asked who she was texting, she'd snap at me with, asterisk, "It's nothing you need to worry about." Asterisk, that wasn't like her. It felt like she was hiding something I wasn't meant to see. At night, I'd lie awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. I thought about confronting her outright, but every time I tried, I froze. I wasn't ready to hear her answer. I wanted to believe everything was fine, that Ethan was just a lonely guy who needed some company and Isabella was simply bored because I worked so much. But deep down, I knew better. That nagging voice in my head wouldn't let it go. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a beer, scrolling through my phone, Isabella was in the kitchen, laughing softly as she texted someone. Her laugh made my nerves spike. Asterisk, "What's so funny?" Asterisk, I asked, glancing up. Her smile vanished, and she shoved her phone into her pocket. "Just Grace from book club," she said, trying to sound casual. But I could tell. We both could. She disappeared upstairs after that, leaving me alone with my beer and my thoughts. The hardest part wasn't the suspicion, it was the doubt. It made me question everything. Every word she said, every glance she gave Ethan, every laugh they shared. And I hated it. I hated that I was starting to doubt my own wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. But the signs kept piling up. Isabella smiled more when Ethan was around. Her eyes sparkled whenever she mentioned his name. And the way they touched. Little things, but just enough to make my skin crawl. I told myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I couldn't shake the truth. That comment from Mason about Ethan and Isabella having fun wasn't just kid talk. It was a warning. I just wasn't ready to listen. Then came that Friday afternoon. I wasn't supposed to be home early, but work wrapped up quicker than expected. I thought I'd surprise Isabella and take her and Mason out to dinner. Things had been tense between us, and I hoped this would help. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Ethan's truck parked out front. My stomach twisted. I told myself he was probably helping out again. Fixing something, maybe. But when I walked up to the door, I saw Ethan stepping out of the house, his shirt half unbuttoned. He froze when he saw me, like a kid caught stealing candy. Isabella stood in the doorway, laughing a little too loudly at something he'd said. Her laugh sounded forced, like she was trying to cover up whatever was really going on. Ethan gave me a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. And just like that, the alarm bells in my head became impossible to ignore. "Hey Noah, just helping Isabella with some stuff," Ethan mumbled, fumbling with the buttons on his shirt. His tone was shaky, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. "Yeah, sure you were," I thought, narrowing my eyes at him. Before I could say anything, Isabella stepped in, her fake smile plastered across her face. "He was just fixing the sink, Noah," she said, her voice overly bright and laced with tension. "You know, the leak we've been dealing with." She sounded way too cheerful, like she was preparing for me to call her out. I wanted to say something, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, my jaw clenched, as Ethan shuffled awkwardly to his truck, avoiding my gaze. Isabella lingered in the doorway, her arms crossed like she was trying to shield herself, pretending like nothing had happened. That night felt worse than any before. During dinner, Isabella barely looked up from her phone, her attention glued to the screen. Every time it lit up, she got this little smirk, like whatever conversation she was having was way more interesting than the rest of us. I couldn't miss how quickly she swiped her messages away whenever I glanced her way. My stomach twisted with the kind of dread you can't shake. I told myself I wasn't going to do it, that I wasn't going to stoop so low as to invade her privacy. But that gut feeling wouldn't let go. That night, after she dozed off on the couch, still clutching her phone in her hand, I saw my chance. She was sound asleep, her breathing slow and steady, completely unaware. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might wake her as I carefully slid the phone from her grasp. Unlocking it was easy. She'd never changed her password. It was still Mason's birthday. And there it was, Ethan's name right at the top of the messages. My blood went ice cold as I opened the thread. It wasn't just playful flirting or innocent banter. The texts were explicit, full of things I couldn't even bring myself to process. The photos, God, the photos. They weren't just risque. They were graphic. Things I never thought she'd share with anyone but me. My hands shook as I scrolled through them, bile rising in my throat. "Had a blast today. Can't wait for round 2. Missed the way you kissed me last time. Maybe next time we skip the wine and go straight to dessert." I couldn't keep reading. It was too much. My heart felt like it had been ripped out and stomped on. I sat there for a long time, staring at her phone in disbelief. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. This was real. Isabella wasn't just cheating. She was emotionally involved. She loved him. The anger and betrayal hit me like a freight train. But I wasn't going to let her get away with this. If she thought I'd sit back and take it, she was wrong. I took screenshots of everything, the texts, the photos, the timestamps. It felt methodical, almost like I was gathering evidence for a case. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I needed control, even if just a sliver of it. The next day, I called Caleb Harper. Caleb's the guy you go to when you need the truth straight, no sugarcoating. He'd been through his own nightmare of a divorce, so I knew he wouldn't hold back. We met up at a bar, and after a couple of drinks, I laid it all out. "She's sleeping with the neighbor," Caleb said, his voice low but sharp. "Jesus, Noah. That's brutal." "Yeah," I muttered, staring at my beer. "I saw the texts. This has been going on for a while." Caleb shook his head, his expression grim. "You know what to do. File for divorce." Screw her, man. Don't waste another second on someone who doesn't respect you. I knew he was right. The logical step was divorce. But logic didn't feel like enough. A simple separation wouldn't cut it. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling, the pain, the anger, the betrayal. I'm not just walking away, I said, my voice hard. She's not getting off that easy. Caleb studied me for a moment before nodding. Revenge, huh? Something like that. I didn't know what my plan was yet, but I wasn't going to play the part of the heartbroken husband who takes the high road while she went on like nothing happened. That night, when I got home, Isabella was already asleep, curled up in bed like everything was fine, like she hadn't just shattered our lives with a few careless messages. I stood there, staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman I married with the stranger lying in front of me. Whatever love I'd had for her was buried now, suffocated under a mountain of anger. If she thought I was going to lie down and take this, she was wrong. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. At first, I didn't know what my next move was. But then Charlotte Hayes came into the picture, and suddenly, I had an opportunity one couldn't ignore. It happened by chance. I just pulled into the driveway when I saw her struggling with a huge box, fumbling to balance it while searching for her keys. Charlotte had moved into the neighborhood a couple of weeks ago, but we hadn't exchanged more than polite hellos. She looked flustered, sweat beading on her forehead as she wrestled with the box. Need a hand? I called, stepping out of the car. She glanced up, her expression shifting from frustration to relief. Oh God, yes. You'd think I was hauling bricks with how heavy this thing feels. I walked over and grabbed the box, surprised at how light it actually was. Bricks, huh? Doesn't feel like it? I said, cracking a smile for the first time in what felt like forever. She laughed. A genuine, easy laugh. Not the fake, forced kind I'd grown used to. Felt good. Really good. No, just camera equipment. Photographer stuff. Welcome to my glamorous life, Charlotte said with a laugh. And just like that, it started, something simple, something innocent. But there was something different about Charlotte. She wasn't guarded or tense, and every interaction with her felt effortless. It was such a stark contrast to Isabella, who now wore her smiles like masks and spoke with a constant edge of irritation. Helping Charlotte carry the box inside felt natural, as if we'd known each other for years instead of a few minutes. There were no awkward silences or veiled tension, just two people talking like old friends. By the way, she said, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, I'm Charlotte, and you must be Noah, right? Yeah, I said with a nod. Nice to finally meet you. She flashed me a grin that seemed to light up her whole face. Thanks for the help, Noah. I owe you one. A couple of days later, she showed up at my door, holding her phone like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Hey, she said with a sheepish laugh. Any chance you're good with tech? My Wi-Fi's acting up, and I'm completely useless with this stuff. I wasn't great with tech, but there was no way I was turning her down. Her place felt different from mine the moment I walked in, warm, inviting. It wasn't weighed down by the tension that had become the norm in my house. As I tinkered with the router, Charlotte made us coffee, then plopped down beside me on the couch. You're a lifesaver, she said, handing me a mug. I've been fighting with that stupid thing all morning. No big deal, I shrugged. Just had to reset a few things. We sat there, sipping coffee, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt relaxed. Charlotte was easy to talk to, her energy playful and refreshing. So, she said with a sly smile, what's your story, Noah? Married? Kids? Yeah, I said, feeling my throat tighten for a moment. Married. Got a son, Mason. He's 8. Her eyes lit up with curiosity. What's your wife like? I hesitated, unsure how to respond. She's complicated, I muttered. Charlotte let out a soft laugh and nudged my arm. The light brush of her fingers against my skin sent a jolt through me. It wasn't much, but it was more warmth than I'd felt from Isabella in months. After that, I started finding reasons to be around Charlotte. I helped her rearrange her furniture, hang pictures, even fix a leaky faucet. Each time, our hands would brush, sometimes accidentally, sometimes not. There was something between us, an unspoken energy I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the playful flirting, though that was definitely part of it. It was the way she looked at me, like I mattered, like I was more than just the guy who paid the bills or came home tired every night. Meanwhile, things with Isabella kept spiraling. She noticed the changes almost immediately, the way I stayed out longer without offering explanations, how I stopped pretending to care about our shallow conversations. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen, her arms crossed and her eyes sharp. "You've been coming home late a lot," she said, her voice icy and accusatory. I leaned against the counter, keeping my face neutral. "Work's been crazy." "Work's been crazy?" she repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. "You're a financial analyst, Noah. You're not saving lives. You don't work around the clock." "Stuff comes up," I said with a shrug, refusing to engage. Her jaw tightened, frustration flickering in her eyes. "You think I don't notice when you lie to me?" she hissed. "I'm not stupid, Noah." I didn't flinch. "Funny," I said coldly. "That's exactly what I was about to say to you." That shut her up, but I could see the cracks forming in her composure. She wasn't oblivious. She could feel the growing distance, and it was eating her alive. A part of me felt vindicated watching her squirm, knowing that for once, she wasn't in control. Every moment I spent with Charlotte felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that Isabella had worn down. Whether it was fixing her sink or sharing a beer on her porch, Charlotte reminded me of what it felt like to be seen, to be valued. Of course, she wasn't naive. One evening, as we sat on her porch, she studied me carefully before speaking. "You've got a lot on your mind, don't you?" "Yeah," I admitted, not bothering to hide it. She tilted her head, her eyes softening with understanding. "Ever think about just letting it go? Just saying, screw it, and doing whatever makes you happy for once?" I looked at her, a slow grin spreading across my face. "Maybe I do." I wasn't speaking in generalities. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Isabella had played her game, but now it was my turn. The lies, the secrets, everything she'd taken for granted. I was going to make her feel it. And Charlotte? She was going to help me. That Thursday, I made up my mind. It was time to stop holding back. Time to stop pretending. I texted Charlotte and asked if she wanted to grab dinner. She replied in seconds. "Thought you'd never ask, winking face." I told Isabella the first was meeting a buddy for drinks, keeping my tone casual. She didn't argue, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her. Let her wonder. Let her stew. At the restaurant, Charlotte was already waiting when I walked in. She stood to greet me, her black dress hugging her curves perfectly, her dark hair falling in soft waves over her shoulder. When she smiled, it was warm and genuine, like she was actually happy to see me. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. The moment Charlotte saw me, her face lit up. "Wow," she said, her smile playful and teasing. "You clean up pretty good, Noah." "Not bad yourself?" I replied, feeling something stir inside me that had been dormant for far too long. We shared a bottle of wine, and the conversation flowed like water, easy and natural. With Charlotte, it was always like that, effortless. And the flirting? Shameless. Her foot brushed against mine under the table, lingering just enough to send a message. I didn't pull away. By the time dessert came, we both knew exactly how the night would end, and I couldn't wait. When dinner was over, there was no need for pretense or polite goodbyes. The second we stepped into her place, the tension that had been building between us finally broke. It was like a dam giving way, everything we'd held back rushing out all at once. Clothes hit the floor, hands explored freely, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was being tolerated. I felt wanted. Charlotte made me feel alive again, like I was more than just a tired, neglected man going through the motions. When the night finally wound down, we lay there in the warm aftermath, tangled up in each other. Charlotte rested her head on my chest, her fingers lazily tracing circles on my skin. "No regrets," she murmured, her voice soft and satisfied. "Not a single one," I whispered back, and I meant every word. The next morning, I drove home with the faint scent of Charlotte's perfume clinging to me. It was subtle but intoxicating, sweet with a hint of spice. It stayed with me like a secret I didn't want to let go of. I didn't bother changing my clothes or showering. I wanted Isabella to notice. When I walked through the door, she was waiting for me in the kitchen. Her arms were crossed tightly, her eyes narrowing the second she saw me. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her tone sharp and accusatory. I breezed past her without making eye contact, but I caught the slight flare of her nostrils as Charlotte's perfume reached her. Her gaze dropped to my collar, where I knew there was a faint smudge of lipstick. I didn't need to see her face to know what was going through her mind. For just a moment, she faltered, but she quickly masked it with a forced, icy smile. "You smell different," she said, her voice laced with suspicion. I shrugged, keeping my tone casual. "Must have been the cologne at the bar. Some guys overdo it." I could feel her seething, but she didn't press. Not yet. The days that followed were a calculated dance, a deliberate game of cat and mouse. I kept seeing Charlotte, and each time, I left just enough for Isabella to find. An unlocked phone with a message from Charlotte. A jacket faintly scented with her perfume. A suggestive text accidentally left visible. The first time Isabella found something, she tried to play it cool, but her facade was paper thin. "Who's Charlotte?" she asked one evening as I came in late. "A friend," I said, kicking off my shoes and deliberately avoiding her gaze. "A friend?" she repeated, her voice rising an octave, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "Yep," I answered, keeping my tone deliberately vague. I could see the uncertainty gnawing at her, and I savored it. She tried to act composed, but I knew her better than that. I knew how to push her buttons, how to make her unravel piece by piece. Watching her squirm under the weight of her own doubts brought a dark, twisted satisfaction I couldn't ignore. One night, I left my phone charging in the living room, knowing full well what would happen. Sure enough, I caught her snooping, scrolling through the messages between me and Charlotte. She didn't see me standing in the hallway, watching as her eyes darted over the flirtatious, intimate texts. I saw the way she recoiled, the way her face twisted with jealousy, hurt, and anger. She slammed the phone onto the counter, her hands trembling as she realized I was standing there. Her face contorted, shifting rapidly from anger to desperation to accusation. "So this is what you've been doing?" she spat, her voice venomous. "Running around with some whore behind my back?" I didn't flinch. "Funny," I said coldly. "I was just about to ask you about Ethan." The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she was completely silent. Her mouth opened, then closed, like she was grasping for words that wouldn't come. She knew she had no right to be angry, not after everything she'd done. But that didn't stop her from trying. "This is different," she stammered, her voice cracking under the strain of her guilt. "What you're doing, it's worse." I cut her off sharply. "Yeah, that's exactly what it is." She froze, her fists clenching at her sides. Her face twisted with fury as she spat out, "You're disgusting." I smiled coldly, unmoved. Takes one to know one. From that moment on, our marriage hit rock bottom. Every interaction turned into a fight, every word dripping with resentment. Meanwhile, I kept seeing Charlotte, savoring every moment of our time together. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself Isabella had stripped away. Isabella tried to keep up appearances, but I could see her unraveling, bit by bit. She had played her game and lost. Now, she had no choice but to watch as I played mine. Colder, sharper, and without remorse. And the best part? I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. These kinds of games don't end quietly. They explode. And that morning, it all blew up in spectacular fashion. Right in our front yard. Charlotte had stopped by to return a lens she'd borrowed from another photographer. It wasn't a big deal. Just an excuse to see me before heading off to her next shoot. We stood outside, leaning casually against my truck, laughing and chatting like nothing else mattered. I should have felt guilty, but I didn't. For the first time in a long while I felt free. And then Isabella stepped out of the house. The second she saw us, her face twisted with rage. Her lips curled, her eyes burned, and for a split second, I thought she might slap me right there in front of Charlotte. Instead, she stormed over, fists clenched, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "What the hell is this?" she shouted, her gaze darting between Charlotte and me. "This is what you've been doing? Sneaking around with her? Mourning?" I said flatly, as though this was the most normal thing in the world. "Don't give me that mourning crap, Noah," Isabella snapped, her voice cracking as she gestured wildly. "Is this what you've been doing? Hiding behind my back with her?" I didn't even blink. "Yeah," I said, my tone calm and deliberate. "That's exactly what I've been doing." Before she could respond, footsteps approached from behind. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Ethan, jogging over from his yard with that stupid, self-righteous look on his face. The same look he always wore when he thought he could swoop in and fix everything. "El Khaliba, maybe you should calm down," Ethan said, placing a hand on her shoulder as if that would settle the storm. "This isn't your fight, Ethan," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "This is between me and my wife. And you were never welcome here." Ethan opened his mouth to say something, but the words never came. He knew exactly what I meant. After an awkward pause, he glanced at Isabella one last time before slinking back toward his yard. It left just the two of us. Isabella standing there, trembling with anger and something deeper, something darker. "So it's true," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're cheating on me. With her." I didn't flinch, didn't look away. I stood there, calm and unmoved, and said the words I'd been waiting weeks to say. "We're even." In an instant, her expression crumbled. The anger, the venom, it all dissolved. What was left was shock, humiliation, and devastation. She looked like a hollow shell of the woman I'd once known. Her legs buckled, and she sank onto the porch step, covering her face with her hands as silent sobs racked her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I felt absolutely nothing for her.
No sympathy, no regret.
Not one bit. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red and swollen, her voice cracked and raw. "Please, Noah," she whispered, barely holding herself together. "We can fix this. I made a mistake with Ethan. It was stupid. It didn't mean anything. I was lonely, and you were always working." Her voice broke off as she searched for something, anything, to salvage what was left. "Please," she begged. "Let's start over. We can go to therapy. We can fix this." I didn't hesitate. My response was colder than I intended, but it felt right.
Isabella, no.
Her face fell, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "No, it doesn't have to be like this. We can still." "No," I interrupted, my tone firm and final. "We can't. I'm done." She knew then that there was no bargaining, no salvaging what we had. No more lies, no more second chances. I was finished. The next day, I contacted a lawyer, Amelia Carter. She came highly recommended, and it didn't take long to see why. Her office was sleek and modern, exuding professionalism. She greeted me with a firm handshake, her hands folded neatly in front of her, as if she already knew exactly why I was there. "So, Mr. Rainey," she began, her voice steady and confident, "what are you hoping for out of this divorce?"
Fast.
"Clean," I said without hesitation. "I don't care about the house. I just want custody of Mason." Amelia made a note, her sharp eyes never leaving mine. "I can make that happen." Her confidence was a relief, something I hadn't felt in weeks. She wasn't there to sugarcoat or offer empty reassurances. She knew what she was doing. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had someone in my corner. Divorce isn't easy. I knew that. But this wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was closing the book entirely. I didn't want to waste another second on the wreckage of my past. The only thing that mattered now was Mason, and everything I was doing was for him. When I came home that evening, Isabella was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She didn't even acknowledge me when I walked in. I stood in the doorway for a moment watching her. Then, finally, I said, "I talked to a lawyer today." Her shoulders sagged, and she inhaled sharply, as if she'd been holding her breath all day. "You really mean it, don't you?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper.
Ido.
The silence that followed wasn't charged with anger or desperation. It was thick and suffocating, like the calm before a storm. In that moment, I realized something that caught me off guard. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken either. I was just done. Done with the lies, the deceit, the woman who had once been my wife. For the first time in forever, I felt like I could breathe. It was as though a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. The divorce wrapped up quicker than I expected. Amelia worked fast. Papers filed, hearings scheduled. Before I knew it, I was legally separated from Isabella. It wasn't painless, but it was efficient. She got the house, just as I'd said. I never cared about it. What mattered was that I had a future that no longer included her. Mason was with me now, full-time, and that was all that mattered. Moving into my new apartment was a mix of relief and strangeness. There was a lightness to it, like shedding an old, suffocating skin. But at the same time, an emptiness lingered. It's strange how the end of a marriage, even one so fractured, can leave a hole. It wasn't the kind of void that distractions could easily fill. No matter how much you try to shove into that space, it just sits there, silent and unrelenting. I threw myself into old hobbies, hoping they'd help me reclaim some sense of myself. Early mornings found me fishing by the lake, the cool air clinging to my skin as I cast my line into the still water. It was peaceful, a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. I hit the hiking trails again, letting the steady rhythm of my steps push me forward. Some days, I went to the gym, trying to sweat out the years of frustration, anger, and resentment that had built up inside me. For a while, Charlotte was still part of my life. We spent time together, enjoying each other's company, but deep down, I knew it wasn't going to last. What we had was never built to go the distance. It wasn't real, not in the way that mattered. She was a distraction, a temporary reprieve from the chaos of my life. And distractions, I learned, only work for so long. One morning, as I lay in her bed staring up at the ceiling, I realized it was time to let her go. When I told her, she smiled softly, her eyes understanding. "I was wondering when you'd figure that out," she said, brushing a light kiss on my cheek. "Take care of yourself, Noah." And just like that, she was gone.
No drama, no tears.
Just an amicable goodbye. It was the kind of clean break I hadn't realized I needed. Isabella, on the other hand, refused to let go. She called, texted, even emailed me relentlessly. At first, I ignored her, hoping she'd give up, but when the messages didn't stop, I blocked her number. I wasn't interested in revisiting the wreckage of the past. I spent too long drowning in it already. It was time to move forward. And then Ethan disappeared. Just like that. One day he was around, and the next he was gone without so much as a goodbye. I didn't ask questions. Maybe Isabella had become too much for him to deal with. Maybe he couldn't handle the fallout. Either way, it wasn't my concern. She could clean up her own mess now. Months later, at a mutual friend's gathering, I was blindsided by an unexpected curveball. I was standing by the grill, keeping to myself, when a woman approached me with a smile. "Hey, you're Noah, right?" she asked, her voice warm and confident. "Caleb mentioned you'd be here."
I'm Evelyn.
Evelyn Moore was unlike anyone I'd met in a long time. She wasn't flashy or trying to impress anyone. She had this quiet strength about her, a calmness that drew me in. We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had slipped by. She told me about her own divorce, how it had reshaped her life. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was picking at old wounds when I shared my story. Talking to Evelyn was easy, like confiding in someone who truly understood without needing every little detail spelled out. After that night, we started seeing each other. Slowly. No rush, no drama. Just two people taking things one day at a time. The walls I'd built around myself, brick by brick, started to come down. For the first time since my marriage had ended, I felt something genuine. Something that went beyond the need for revenge or the temporary comfort of a distraction. Isabella tried to reach out one last time, leaving me a voicemail. I didn't even listen to it. I deleted it without a second thought. There was nothing she could say that would change anything. The past was behind me now, and I wasn't going to drag it into my future. One morning, I found myself standing by the lake, fishing rod in hand, watching the sunrise paint the water in golds and pinks. The stillness of the moment settled around me like a blanket, soothing and serene. I thought about Isabella, about Ethan, about the anger and bitterness that had consumed me for so long. Revenge had been sweet in its moment, but fleeting, like a spark that burns bright and then fizzles into nothing. What truly set me free wasn't getting back at Isabella. It was letting go, walking away from the wreckage and never looking back. As I stood there, breathing in the crisp morning air, the weight of everything that had come before finally lifted. And for the first time in years, I smiled. I was free, and it felt damn good.